Welcome back to week 3 of the most watchable games of the week, best bets of the week, Aggie score prediction, and an Aggie's rankings. Yes, it's a combo video where we go through all of those things from an Aggie perspective. So I know most of you really care about it, and all you non-Aggies, don't you want to learn what makes us Aggies tick? Don't you want to learn what the guy who's whooping and hollering at midnight yell, how he thinks and the weird things that he does? Don't you just want to monitor this specimen? Well, this is the right video for you. So you're going to see an Aggie's opinions on some of the highest profile games of the week, as well as giving some of the best bets of the week, of which we are 4-0 on. Yes, 4-0 on the best bets. We will not stay like that. We will fail, but we're only picking the cream of the crop in this show, meaning we're only picking a few of the best games of the week. We're going to do the very best bets of the week, only doing the top 15 instead of a top 25 poll. And yes, that's my own home blend poll. I'm picking this, so you know it's right. And then I am picking the most important game of the week, not just the winner, but also the score of the Texas A&M game every week. But let's get into it. This week, we are starting with OU Nebraska. Well, Scott Frost is gone. It was, always coming. It came a little earlier than we expected, and it cost Nebraska $7 million more to do it. But Scott Frost is gone a few weeks before his buyout changes. OU has not looked great this year, in my opinion. They've had fast starts turn into kind of sputtering at the end in the first week, and then they had a very slow start to where they finally scored a few points in the third quarter and put the game away last week. And those were against G5 schools at home. OU has not looked crisp. They've done enough to keep that scoreboard looking good, to keep the perception very positive at OU. I mean, hell, they're ranked 6. So OU is still soaring. They're minus 11 on the road. And yeah, Nebraska sucks. They've not been good for several years. But what has Nebraska consistently done? Lose one-score games. Yes, they lose one-score games. So we're getting like borderline 2 scores at home for Nebraska with the hype of a new coaching staff. And of course, this is not any X's and O's. This is not any high-level analysis, but I'm just reading it how we've seen it the last couple years. Nebraska, despite the opponent, finds a way to get into these dogfight close games. And if you're giving me a touchdown and a field goal to still cover, I'm taking Nebraska. I'm taking the points, and I'm calling it my best bet of the week. Well, one of them. Because I'm feeling this game. I'm feeling the hype for Nebraska. I mean, they have an interim coach right now, but I just feel like the hype of getting rid of the guy that you perceive as the problem, which we really don't know if he is the problem, probably is. But that's going to generate hype. The stadium's going to be packed. It's an old school rivalry that's being rekindled. So I think there's a lot to like about Nebraska this game. I don't think they win outright. I think they lose another close game. But I think it's a game that is pretty likely to go that route. So we're taking Nebraska in the points, but we're picking OU to win. Big SEC game, the first CBS primetime 2:30 game of the year. Penn State Nittany Lions at the Auburn Tigers. Auburn has not looked great this year. Much like Texas A&M, quarterback issues, struggling to get the ball running, but they've won their games, and if they win this game, there's a good chance they start the year 4-0, 5-0, and they get things off to a great foot despite not looking great. Penn State has been pretty good, not great. Quarterback has been good. They won that first week game at Purdue, a very tough game to win on the road during a weekday game. They almost lost that game. But Purdue's home field and Auburn's home field, while undefeated even, or especially, are not the same thing. Jordan-Hare Stadium is a weird place. We've seen many superior teams go there and lose. I mean, yes, in rivalry games more often than not, but still, this place is a very hostile, close quarters environment, especially when Auburn's undefeated. Especially when a high-profile Big Ten team comes in, and especially when it's the second leg of a home-and-home, the first of which you lose. So, yeah, I'm going to go full SEC homer here and pick Auburn to win. Not really placing a bet this game, but if you were to give me the home SEC Auburn school with a couple points, and I had to choose between that one and the road team minus the points. I'm taking the points and the SEC home school. Yes, I'm a homer. Because the next game is also an SEC matchup that I am highlighting. Mississippi State is a team that I've been high on all year. They bring a lot back. Mike Leach's scheme has been proven to give teams a lot of trouble over the years, and their defense is as good as it's been in a long time. They're on the road at LSU, who has not looked very good to start this year. We all saw that first LSU performance in which special team errors, inability to move the ball, they're plagued by so many different things. And then, of course, the locker room questions come into play. You know, this is a game that I would not be super confident to just throw a ton of money at, but it's a game that I'd be interested in betting on because I think Mississippi State is just the superior team here. I think they have a good chance to win 8, 9, 10 games this year. They had a tough road win last week at Arizona, and I don't care what you say, if you're an SEC school, an Eastern school, going to play a Pac-12 after dark game on the road, that's a tough place to win, and they won and covered. So I look at Mississippi State to be able to go and cover on the road here at LSU, a much more hostile environment, and LSU is undefeated. They will bring a packed house, but I think Mississippi State is just too good and too polished to not beat LSU on the road. And then my popcorn game of the week, as I call it, which is the most watchable, best game of the week, also happens to be the most important game, in my opinion, every week, the Texas A&M game. Yes, it loses the top 15 nature that it could have had if Texas A&M didn't sputter against App State. But it makes the game even more important for Texas A&M. And it's important for Miami too, because Miami hasn't necessarily shown a clean performance offensively this season. There are issues on both sides of the ball for both teams. Which one comes out on top? Which one, takes that next step this week? I don't know. It's going to be a good game. It's going to be a really close game. Texas A&M, I think, opened as a 6-point or a 5.5-point favorite. They're now a 6.5-point favorite. Max Johnson was just announced the starter. I think that bodes well for Texas A&M because you needed to see a change in some capacity, and what better way to do it than change the most significant player on a football field, the quarterback. I think that bodes well for Texas A&M. This was also a good under game because both offenses have struggled. Both defenses are good, and Miami's defense is quite experienced. The over-under was 44. I would have hammered that before the news about Max Johnson, but it's not happening. Max is playing. I think there's a good chance there's some sparks offensively for Texas A&M. And I don't think they're going to go smash that over-under, but I think that 44 is in jeopardy. I haven't seen if it's moved. I'm assuming it has moved, if only by a couple points or a half point. But this is a scary game. If you're going to bet anything, I would bet Texas A&M money line because I think they're going to win a very close game. I think it's going to be right on the border of covering or not, so I'm not really too eager to go hit that, but I do feel like Texas A&M does win this game, and I'm going 31-24. I think it's a very, very important backs against the wall Texas A&M game. I mean, there's so much on the line here. You have the 2022 recruiting class. You don't want them to lose 2 home games to start the 2022 season. You don't want that to be their first experience at Texas A&M in this transfer portal era, this NIL era where other teams can kind of draw them in, or they could jump ship and go, especially when the big recruiting tagline of the last couple years by Texas A&M has been built on the premise that these recruits are coming to A&M to do something that's never been done, and that's win a championship at Texas A&M. If you lose 2 home games in your first experience at Texas A&M, your first season at Texas A&M, I mean, that doesn't really bode well for your future there, especially in the perception of these young athletes in this current instant gratification world where people can get in your ear so easily through social media, through posts, through, memes. Very important game in that regard, in the recruiting world. Very important game for Jimbo Fisher. If Jimbo drops 2 at home to start his 5th year as the head coach of Texas A&M, what does that mean? I mean, he has talent. He has experience. He has tenure. He's been here. you lose 2 games at home to start your 5th year. That's a major red flag. I mean, yeah, you got to win this one if you're Jimbo Fisher. But I think the backs against the wall scenario is one where Texas A&M has thrived over the last few years. You look at 2020, backs against the wall. They had a bad starting game against Vandy, horrible out the gates, got destroyed by Alabama the next weekend, but then came back with a huge victory over Florida that kind of set the tone for A&M's best season under Jimbo Fisher, which was that 2020 year. And then last year, Texas A&M loses, neutral site Arkansas, horrible loss. Texas A&M loses at home, packed house versus Mississippi State, horrible loss. Both inexplicable. Both games you should have won. But then they come back with the biggest victory of Jimbo's A&M tenure, that win versus Alabama at home. So is this another one of those scenarios? Can we bank on that? I don't think we can bank on it, but I think there's a damn good chance of that happening. So I'm picking Texas A&M 31-24, and if you want to bet this game, I believe the Texas A&M money line is a secure bet. Although you won't get the best odds out of it, I think it's a good add-on to your weekly lineup. But it's not one of my best bets. Like the 2 that I mentioned before, which were Nebraska, that's supposed to say plus 11, at home versus OU with a new head coach. And then Mississippi State, I didn't call it one of my best bets initially, but I threw it in here. I think Mississippi State is one that can cover on the road and probably will. You know, it's going to be a battle with LSU for a couple quarters, but I do think Mississippi State has the firepower, the experience, and the coaching consistency over the last couple years to make this a 1 or 2 score win. Most likely they win by 7-10 points. But then I have a couple of bonus bets for the week. And there are a couple of money line games that I'm feeling pretty good about where you're going to get pretty good odds. So I have Vandy and Louisville money line. And if you can get to this video before the Friday night games start, I do think Louisville has a great chance of winning this game tonight as the underdog at home on a Friday night game. You know that stadium is going to be packed. I believe people are down on Louisville because of their performance week 1, where they lost inexplicably in a blowout to Syracuse. But as I've been saying, I don't think week 1 for a lot of teams indicates what the team really is. And I do believe Louisville found something last week, UCF, in the second half when they got things going. I love Malik Cunningham. I love what he can do for an offense. And I just think being at home on a Friday night really bodes well for Louisville versus Florida State. And I think they get the W. And they have, you can buy it with 2.5 points, but I'm going money line. I think Louisville just wins this game, get a little bit better odds that way. And then Vandy, they did lose at home to Wake Forest last week, who they got Sam Hartman back, and Wake Forest looked pretty good. But Vandy looked pretty good their first 2 games against subpar opponents. And they have a subpar opponent this week in Northern Illinois, who hasn't really done much this year, hasn't looked great in the games that they have played in. So I think Vandy goes on the road and wins the game at Northern Illinois, because Vandy did look good against those inferior opponents. And it was only until they faced a great team with a good quarterback, or should I say a good team with a great quarterback, in Wake Forest that they struggled. So I'm looking for those 2 money lines. And then Mississippi State and Nebraska, spread, bet on them. I am 4-0. Will we keep it undefeated? Will we double that up and go 8-0? We'll find out. And then, of course, I love giving my top 15. Why? Because I just like to do it. I like to rank the teams. Everybody loves rankings. Everybody loves hierarchies. So I go ahead and do it. At 15, I have Michigan State. They have held serve so far this season, although I think they're going to run into issues when they face better opponents. The quarterback so far has been an interception machine. Defense has been solid. They've been bend, don't break. They give up yards, but they don't really give up points. But I still want to see them against some better teams before I start moving them high up the rankings. I'm unsure about them. I don't give them the huge benefit of the doubt just yet because there's so many changes there. But I have them at 15 now. Teams have dropped behind them. They're at 15. 14, Utah. They went and blew out some direction Utah school. It was Southern Utah. Won like 73-10 or something, 73-3. I mean, they held serve after they lost. So Utah's still alive. They came with a vengeance against a much inferior team. We don't move them up. We keep them at 14. At 13, I have Mississippi State. I've been high on them all year, and with teams dropping, they were one of the teams that I had benefit from it. They won a game on the road at Pac-12 After Dark, and Arizona was not a great team last year. I think they were coined as the best one-win team of all time. I don't know what that means, but they won on the road. They covered on the road, and I'm very high on them. As I said before, they bring a lot back. Mike Leach's system, great defense. BYU deserves to be ranked where they're ranked in my poll, I believe. And I think they're ranked in this area in the AP coaches as well. Huge home win versus Baylor, who I thought was a clear win and a clear candidate to cover, win outright. They were the underdogs on the road. And it was very close, but they didn't. BYU held serve against a larger and more talented, quote-unquote, team. If BYU can do that, with the schedule that they have this year, they still play Arkansas, Oregon, and others. They could become a playoff contender if they just keep winning. And if they beat Baylor, I think they can beat any of these other teams. I don't know if the road factor will be huge because they're playing at Oregon this weekend. But that is a very significant sign for BYU for me, and they are poised right now to make a playoff push. So look out for them. Oklahoma State is a team that just keeps moving up. I mean, I'm not high on them. I haven't seen enough of them to want to really justify where they are. But we know what they bring back. We know their coaching pedigree. I mean, you got to give them the benefit of that and keep them here. I'm not going to drop them or prevent them from moving up until they lose, or really until they lose, because they have all their season ahead of them. They have all their tough games ahead of them. They haven't played anybody of significance just yet. But how will they look against those teams? So kind of how I feel about Michigan State is how I feel about Oklahoma State. And I have Tennessee in the top 10. They beat Pitt last week. I had Tennessee at 15 the week before. Teams lost in front of them. Obviously, they're one of the candidates to move way up. And the offense didn't look great against Pitt. It was a road game. Offense couldn't really get too much rhythm going. Defense won the game for them. And Tennessee hasn't really had a defense before the last few years. So if they can get both rolling on the same game, I think this is a clear top 10 team. I think this is a team that has a chance to become the second place team in the SEC East, which is pretty dang stacked this year, because you got Kentucky at 9, who went and beat Florida on the road. And Florida beat Utah the week before at home. But Kentucky looked like the better team against Florida. Florida was throwing interceptions left and right. Threw 2 interceptions, one of which was a pick 6. Anthony Richardson had a big drop-off. But Kentucky looks like, I mean, if they can go on the road and win against a hot Florida team early in the year, where I said Florida will be good until they start getting banged up, I think Kentucky deserves to be a top 10 team right now. And you got some great SEC East matchups coming up this year. At 8, I have Oklahoma. This is by default. They started high. They have the talent. They have a good coach in the first year. But I don't think they look all that great. And I think they're on upset alert this weekend, though I don't think it happens because Nebraska. At 7, I have Arkansas. I've been high on them the whole time. They beat a ranked and better than expected Cincinnati team. They won at home versus South Carolina. They covered at home versus South Carolina. I have no reason to drop them, and I move them up with the flow of the losses. Of course, Texas A&M was one of them. Unfortunately, USC is 6. They've done what they're supposed to do. Their offense looks like it's going to carry them through the Pac-12 with no problem. Notre Dame's struggling. They could probably beat Notre Dame this year. I don't see why they can't make it to the playoff, honestly, at this point, unless Utah says something about it. I still have major concerns about them playing against the upper echelon schools. They're tiny on defense, and they're not that great they're not that huge on the offensive line. I think there's a good chance they can get blown away, not necessarily on the scoreboard, but physically on the field, if they were to go up against any of the playoff contenders, specifically Bama or Georgia, or even Arkansas. So, I mean, they deserve to be 6. They're really good. Their offense will keep them in most games, maybe even against those teams. But at the end of the day, I think that their size and all that is going to cost them down the stretch. At 5, I have Michigan. They've done nothing but blow out the inferior teams like they're supposed to. They found their quarterback. McCarthy looks great. I mean, he looks really good. I think he didn't even play that much last game. I think he was like 10 of 12 for like 200-something yards against Hawaii last week, who is not good. But they did what they're supposed to do in 2 consecutive games, and they found their quarterback. No reason to drop them. They take over the 5 spot after A&M drops out. And at 4, I have Clemson. they looked better last week. I mean, a little bit better offensively. It was against like Furman or something, but I mean, you got to get some rhythm. They only scored 35 points, so the concerns aren't totally alleviated, but if they can add to that momentum and start gaining some offensive rhythm, I think with the talent, the coaching, yes, I believe in Dabo. He's won there before with generational quarterbacks, but he has won at Clemson before. I don't see any reason to drop them as of yet, and I think they still have a great chance of making the playoff. And then 3, 2, 1 are still the same teams, but the order has changed on my poll, as they have with most polls. Ohio State remains 3. They held serve against Arkansas State last week. Slow start, but they got things going. They didn't have Smith and Jigba, but they have great receivers regardless, and they have C.J. Stroud. They still have some concerns, but they're getting better. It might just be a slow start to the year for them. I wouldn't worry too much about Ohio State just yet. They stay at 3. At 2, you have Bama. They did not look great on the road at Texas. And, you know, Texas fans will tell you that they are one of the best teams in the country. Heck, I know a Texas fan that thinks that the top 3 should be Alabama, Texas, and Georgia, and they don't think it's particularly close. But anyway, I have Bama at 2 because Georgia has just looked so good to start this year. I think Georgia is that team this year, again. And this time their offense looks good. Stetson Bennett, I mean, what can you say? They have so many weapons on offense. The defense is the Georgia defense. It's not going to be what it was last year, but it's looked damn good so far this year. It's going to be very interesting once Georgia gets into that SEC East play because the East is stacked. But that's the rankings, guys. Of course, our Aggies unfortunately drop out. I mean, what are you going to do? They lose to App State. What can you do? I'd have them probably 25 or unranked. But they have everything in front of them this weekend. But guys, did I get my rankings right? Do you agree with my picks and my bets? I feel good about them. I felt good about them the last few weeks. And I think I don't have a record on my picks, but I think I've been doing all right. Pretty easy games. I picked the marquee games because those are the ones we care about. Those are the ones I want to see. I'm going to the Aggie game this weekend. I won't have a lot of time to watch all the games, so I'm going to prioritize these few. But what games are y'all looking forward to? And what would you change about my top 15? If you guys could like, subscribe, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.